Why I write books most people won't want to read. I don't know about you, but I love a good story, especially the kind that make you think about life, the past, how the present affects the future. I couldn't get enough of books growing up. They took me places, they took me to events, and they exposed me to what I later learned was an aspect of quantum physics before I'd even reached fifth grade. And I'm looking at you, Madeline L'Engle, and Pierre Anthony. The most compelling places they took me were into the mind, the experiences and the emotions of the characters, and from there, how all those aspects could affect their futures. I became fascinated by cause and effect on the evolution of the characters. And I'm sure some books still do that, but the readers have changed, or maybe they really haven't, I'm not sure. But I'll tell you this, I write books now and dabble in screenplays, been doing it for 44 years, and the books I write are the ones most people will never want to read. If you like books you won't remember an hour after you finish them, or books that don't challenge you, your perceptions, your perspective, or whatever it is you think you know, feel free to scroll on. For those who stayed, and thanks, here's why most folks will never read my books. I don't write for comfort. I don't write for escapism. And I don't write to make difficult things palatable for people who'd rather not acknowledge them. I write for readers who relentlessly search for characters with more than one dimension. Ones who feel like they're someone they may know or be. The paragraphs I write are pivotal. So if you're the reader who trades narrative for dialogue, my books aren't for you. An early creative writing teacher once told me, "No one is ever going to want to read something like this from a girl." She never mentioned the quality of the writing, but what I'm fairly certain it was that struck her was the content. It was a character study, a thought experiment in what it would take to turn a beloved hero into a murderer. It was dark and emotionally raw, and it didn't have a happy ending. It had a plausible one for the situation, though. It wasn't soft or agreeable, and there was no redemption. When she said what she did, what I'm pretty sure she really meant was, this will make people uncomfortable. So if you're the kind of reader who can tell exactly who the main character or characters is or are, because the only books you read are trope, backwash, and rehash, mine aren't for you. Going back to that teacher and what she said, I believed her. I tried writing softer stories, more traditional, more empty, more surface, more inoffensive. I tried to write for acceptability, to keep things the way a female writer should write. But here's the thing. How can you write characters who don't face consequences when you know that in not just the real world, but any world, they would? How could I dilute or dummy down or soften circumstances that have real world consequences, especially if I want readers who live in the real world and may have already faced consequences that the characters are coming into? How would they have any faith in my work? How could I sugarcoat the cost of having grown up invisible? Or diminish something meant to meet the needs of people who actually need these stories? It wouldn't be right, and it wouldn't be fair. In fact, it would be cruel, and that is not my nature. That's not why I write. I write what I write to share clarity, to try to understand and share what I do understand. How could I turn my creative back on the ones who learned silence was their only safety? Or who knew that terror lurked in the living room instead of the woods? Or grew up in houses where the danger wasn't imaginary? Those readers don't need softened stories. They need someone who sees them as they are and where they are. If this doesn't sound like something that you look for in stories, mine aren't for you. One of my best-selling books so far is called Broken, originally titled Know the Enemy. I mean, that's really the whole title right there. I just updated the cover, and that originally titled part isn't on it anymore, but it is still part of the Amazon process. What it is a psychological thriller that deals with abuse and trauma and the fact that most monsters are made, not born. And survival means enduring what should never have to have been faced in the first place. Soul Hunter, a supernatural thriller, is getting a new cover soon too. Again, it's a supernatural thriller. It takes a look at one of those monsters who really was just born wired wrong, because sometimes that does happen to people. But what I feel is the best fiction work of my life at this point is my dark fantasy series, Heroes of the Line. It starts in the real world, hinting at supernatural danger. Then it snowballs into cosmic forces and fractured realities. But the most important part is its emotional core, and that is always grounded in reality stressed by circumstances. For some people, it will be uncomfortably real, because that's the world a lot of kids actually grow up in. Now, make no mistake, though, these are not books for children. They are books about children growing up like many of their readers did. What do all my books have in common? They're not for people who want light escapism, who don't want to think about abuse, neglect, trauma, or what it takes to survive those things. Or people who prefer stories where everything is neat and safe and sanitized. They won't like these stories either, and that's okay. They're not the ones that I wrote them for. I write for the readers who recognize themselves in the silences, who see their own childhood in the quiet of my characters, the ones who understand what it means to grow up too early or become hyper-aware, for those who became resilient out of necessity, not choice. I write for the ones who don't know they don't have to be quieter or nicer or smaller. My books will never be trendy, but they will always have validity. They don't fit marketing formula. They reflect back to their readers. You weren't imagining it. You weren't weak. You weren't alone. And that kind of recognition can be life-changing. So, I understand why most people won't ever read any of my books. They're heavy. They're emotionally demanding. They ask you to feel things. They don't look away when things get uncomfortable. But for the people who need to know they're not alone and actually do read them, I've been told it's like finally being seen. And that is why I write what I write.